They hanged an innocent man and thought they got away with it. They didn't know his 12-year-old brother was watching. They didn't know that boy would spend 18 years becoming a lawyer, and they definitely didn't know he'd come back as their judge.
Hello, I wish you a wonderful, amazing 2026. If you enjoy old Western stories, then you're in the right place. Tell me where you're watching from, comment, and share these videos with friends and families. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, too. My team and I have something wonderful and free for you once we hit the 1,000 subscriber mark. We will share it in the community. You know, we go to great lengths to craft these stories, so your support means a lot to us. Join us and be a part of what we are building.
Before we dive into today's story, let me share something most people don't know about the Old West. Between 1850 and 1900, over 200 documented cases exist of innocent men being hanged based on false testimony or fabricated evidence. In frontier towns like Dodge City, the legal system was often controlled by wealthy cattle barons, corrupt politicians, and lawmen who answered to the highest bidder, not to justice. Here's the shocking part. Only about 15% of wrongful executions were ever investigated, and almost none of the perpetrators faced consequences. Why? Because in many frontier towns, the same men who owned the land also controlled the courts, the sheriffs, and even the juries. If you crossed them, you didn't just lose your property, you lost your life. This wasn't just lawlessness, this was systematic corruption hiding behind a badge and a gavel. And for the families left behind, there was rarely any recourse, no appeals, no justice, just grief and powerlessness. Today's story is about one man who refused to accept that powerlessness. Let's begin. Dodge City, Kansas, July 1876. The hanging tree in the town square cast a shadow that never seemed to move, no matter where the sun sat in the sky. 12-year-old Ethan Colfax stood in the crowd, his small hand gripping his older brother's coat as the noose was fitted around 22-year-old Daniel's neck. Daniel wasn't crying. His face was calm, almost serene, as he looked down at Ethan through the sea of angry faces. The charges were cattle rustling and the murder of ranch hand Pete Garrison. Both lies. Everyone knew it. But when you're poor and the man accusing you owns half the county, truth doesn't matter much. "Take care of Ma," Daniel mouthed silently. Before Ethan could respond, Mayor Clayton Hargrove gave the signal. The trapdoor opened. Ethan screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the roar of the mob. That night, Ethan's mother died of a broken heart, clutching Daniel's Bible. At 12 years old, Ethan Colfax became an orphan with nothing but rage and a promise carved into his soul. He would make them pay. But not with a gun. That would be too quick, too merciful. No, Ethan would do something far more devastating. He would become their judge. 18 years later, 1894. The Kansas prairie stretched endlessly under a merciless August sun. A lone rider approached Dodge City on a black gelding, dust trailing behind him like a funeral shroud. The man was tall, lean, with silver threading through his dark hair despite being only 30 years old. He wore a fine black suit, a gold watch chain glinting at his vest, and round spectacles that gave him a scholarly air. His name, according to the papers in his saddlebag, was Judge Silas Merrick, appointed by the territorial governor to preside over the newly established district court. No one in Dodge City recognized him. Why would they? The skinny, sobbing boy who'd watched his brother hang had transformed into a man of education, refinement, and impeccable credentials. Ethan Colfax had spent 18 years erasing himself. He'd worked cattle drives until he had enough money for school. He'd studied law in Chicago under a false name, graduated top of his class, and practiced in St. Louis, building a reputation as brilliant and ruthless. He'd changed his appearance, his voice, even his handwriting, and now he'd returned. As he rode past the hanging tree, still standing after all these years, he didn't look at it. He didn't need to. He had memorized every grain of that cursed wood. Judge Merrick's arrival was celebrated. Dodge City had grown rowdy and lawless, and the town council hoped a distinguished Eastern judge would bring order. Mayor Hargrove, now 70 and bloated with decades of corruption, personally welcomed him at the Grand Hotel. "Judge Merrick, an honor, sir," Hargrove wheezed, extending a fat, ring-laden hand. Ethan shook it, maintaining a pleasant smile even as every fiber of his being screamed to crush the hand that had signed his brother's death warrant. "The honor's mine, Mayor. I've heard Dodge City is a town of opportunity." "Indeed, indeed. You'll find we take care of our friends here, Judge." The message was clear. Play along, take the bribes, look the other way. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "I'm sure we'll get along famously." That first week, Ethan studied his prey. Hargrove still controlled the town through a network of bribes and intimidation. Sheriff Buck Thornton, the man who'd arrested Daniel on fabricated evidence, now ran protection rackets. And Vincent Prescott, the cattle baron whose testimony had condemned Daniel, had expanded his empire by driving out smaller ranchers through violence and legal manipulation. They were all still here, rich and untouchable. But they'd made one fatal mistake. They'd brought in a judge they couldn't control because they didn't know who he really was. Want to know what happens next? Keep listening. Also subscribe so you don't miss other coming stories like this one. Ethan's first case was a land dispute. A widow named Margaret Hayes was being forced off her property by Vincent Prescott, who claimed she owed back taxes. The previous judge had always ruled in Prescott's favor. Prescott sat in the courtroom, confident and smirking, his lawyer barely bothering to present evidence. When it was the widow's turn, she could barely speak through her tears. Ethan listened intently, then asked to see the tax records. Something didn't add up. He called for a recess and spent the night poring over documents. By morning, he discovered the taxes had been paid in full, but the county clerk on Prescott's payroll had lost the receipts. In court, Ethan delivered his ruling with surgical precision. "Mr. Prescott, I find your claim fraudulent. Mrs. Hayes keeps her land. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the territorial marshal for investigation of fraud and corruption." The courtroom erupted. Prescott's face turned purple. "You can't do this. Do you know who I am?" Ethan removed his spectacles, cleaning them slowly. "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Prescott." Something in his tone made Prescott pause. For just a moment, he looked uncertain. But the moment passed. Prescott stormed out, convinced he could have this uppity judge removed. He had no idea he'd just signed his own death warrant. That night, Mayor Hargrove summoned Ethan to his mansion. The opulent house reeked of old money and older sins. Hargrove sat in a leather chair, smoking a cigar, trying to look intimidating. "Judge Merrick, I think we got off on the wrong foot. In Dodge City, we have certain understandings." Ethan sat across from him, perfectly composed. "I understand perfectly, Mayor." Hargrove smiled, relieved. "Good, good. Now, about the Prescott matter. I understand that you've been stealing from this town for 30 years. I understand that Sheriff Thornton murdered 3 homesteaders in 1889, and you covered it up. I understand that Vincent Prescott's fortune was built on land seized through perjury and murder." Hargrove's smile died. "I understand everything, Mayor, and soon everyone else will too." Hargrove's face went from red to white. Who the hell are you?" Ethan stood, buttoning his coat. "I'm your judge, and your judgment day is coming." As he walked out, Hargrove sat frozen, the cigar burning forgotten in his trembling hand. Something about those cold gray eyes behind the spectacles had triggered a distant memory, but he couldn't quite place it. Not yet. But he would. They all would. When it was too late. The trap closed with methodical precision. Ethan didn't rush. Revenge served cold is most satisfying. He began with Sheriff Thornton. During a routine case involving a horse thief, Ethan accidentally discovered evidence of Thornton's protection rackets in the court files. He couldn't ignore it as a judge, could he? He called a grand jury. Thornton, furious and desperate, tried to intimidate the witnesses, but Ethan had quietly been meeting with the townsfolk Thornton had terrorized for years, promising them protection. One by one, they testified. When Thornton was arrested, he pointed at Ethan in the courtroom, his voice cracking. "This is a setup! You planned this!" Ethan looked at him with perfect judicial neutrality. "Sheriff Thornton, are you suggesting this court is biased? That would be contempt." Thornton lunged forward. "I know you! I've seen those eyes before!" The bailiffs dragged him away, still screaming. In his cell that night, Buck Thornton finally remembered. A 12-year-old boy with gray eyes, standing in the crowd 18 years ago, watching Daniel Colfax hang. He started laughing, a broken, hysterical sound. He knew he was finished. 3 days later, Thornton was found hanged in his cell with a bedsheet. The official ruling was suicide. Only Ethan knew the sheriff's last words, whispered through the bars. "He deserved better than me." If you're enjoying the story, please subscribe to our channel. A family member dared us that we can't get to 1,000 subscribers this February, and we are trying to beat that dare. More stories are in the works too, and when you subscribe, you won't miss them.
Vincent Prescott was next, and he proved more dangerous. The cattle baron hired a gunfighter named Cole Drifton to kill the troublesome judge. Drifton was fast, professional, and had 12 kills to his name. He found Ethan alone one evening on the trail outside town. "Nothing personal, Judge," Drifton said, his hand hovering over his revolver. Ethan didn't reach for a weapon. He simply looked at Drifton and spoke quietly. "Cole Drifton, wanted in Arizona for the murder of Marshal Thomas Wickham. There's a $500 bounty on your head." Drifton's confidence faltered. "How? I'm a judge. I know every wanted poster between here and California. You kill me, every lawman in 3 territories will hunt you. Or," Ethan stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely a whisper, "you testify against Vincent Prescott, and I'll arrange for your pardon. Fresh start, new life." Drifton stared at the judge, seeing something in those gray eyes that made him holster his weapon. "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm not interested in hired guns. I want the men who hire them." 2 weeks later, Drifton testified in court, detailing every murder, every fire, every act of terror Prescott had ordered. Prescott's empire crumbled in 3 days. When the verdict came, guilty on 18 counts, Prescott looked across the courtroom at Ethan and finally saw it. The boy, the hanging, the brother. "Colfax," he whispered. Mayor Hargrove was the last, and he knew what was coming. The old man had stopped sleeping, jumping at shadows, drinking himself into oblivion. He'd figured out who Judge Merrick really was, but he couldn't prove it. Couldn't stop it. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making. Ethan built the case meticulously. Embezzlement, bribery, conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence was overwhelming. When the trial began, Hargrove sat in the defendant's chair, shaking like a leaf. His expensive lawyers couldn't save him. On the final day, before sentencing, Hargrove stood and addressed the court. "I'm an old man.
I did terrible things, I know that. His voice broke. But that boy, Daniel Colfax, he really was innocent, wasn't he? The courtroom went silent. Ethan removed his spectacles, set them on the bench, and for the first time in 18 years, let them see who he truly was. Yes, Mayor, my brother was innocent. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Reporters scrambled for their notebooks. Hargrove closed his eyes. I'm sorry. I know you are, Ethan said quietly, but sorry doesn't bring him back. Clayton Hargrove, I sentence you to 15 years hard labor. May God have mercy on your soul, because I have none. As they led Hargrove away in chains, the old man looked back one last time at the boy he'd destroyed, now the man who'd destroyed him in return.
The scandal rocked Kansas. Judge Silas Merrick was revealed to be Ethan Colfax, and the debate raged. Was this justice or revenge? The territorial governor launched an investigation. Every ruling Ethan had made was examined under a microscope. And here's what they found. Every single judgment was legally sound. Every conviction backed by irrefutable evidence. Every procedure followed to the letter. Ethan hadn't bent the law. He'd wielded it like a sword forged in righteousness. The governor had no choice but to clear him. Ethan Colfax stood in front of the hanging tree one last time, his brother's worn Bible in his hands. He'd won. The men who'd murdered Daniel had fallen, not by the gun, but by the very system they'd corrupted. But victory tasted like ash. Daniel was still gone. Their mother was still dead. 18 years of his life had been consumed by this mission. Was it worth it? A voice asked. Margaret Hayes, the widow he'd saved, stood nearby, her eyes kind. Ethan was silent for a long moment. Then he placed the Bible at the base of the tree and turned away. It had to be done. He rode out of Dodge City that afternoon, leaving behind the black robes and the spectacles. Judge Silas Merrick ceased to exist. Ethan Colfax was finally free. Justice, it turned out, wasn't blind after all. Sometimes it just took 18 years to open its eyes. If you loved this story, be a part of our community and get notified about other stories coming soon. Subscribe to our channel to qualify for the upcoming giveaway we will do once we hit 1,000 subscribers. Check out the next story now.
If you enjoyed this latest story on life in the Old Wild West, then I'm sure you will love the next one coming up. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you can get updates on time. Did I tell you we post new, exciting, heartwarming stories daily? Subscribe now to join us so you won't miss any new stories.